Play on the field, the courts, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and promoters who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go behind the game with Patrick Klinger and Bill Robertson. Welcome to Behind the Game, presented by Lexus of Maplewood and Lexus of Wayzata. I'm Patrick Klinger, president of Agile Marketing Partners. Alongside me, a man who had preferred walk-on status at Highland Catholic Middle School, Bill Robertson. Billy, how are you?
I'm doing great, Patrick.
Good to see you. I hope you took advantage of that opportunity.
Absolutely, I did. Absolutely. That took me on to Cretan High School, so that was a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, you're a bit of a playground legend, sir. I mean, how else do you get in the Mancini Hall of Fame? Well,
that's true. There was a lot of reasons for that, but it's great to be here today with you and our special guest. We have a wonderful guest for our audience today. I think he's one of the busiest people in the Twin Cities. He's married, has 5 children, is a senior vice president at Bell Bank. What a great career he's had in the world of sports. He was the 1997 Football Gatorade Player of the Year in the state of North Dakota. He was a 4-year quarterback and starter at the University of Wisconsin. He played with the Minnesota Vikings, the New York Jets, the Dallas Cowboys, Detroit Lions in the NFL. He's in University of Wisconsin Badger Hall of Fame, and he was inducted in 2017. Our guest, Brooks Bollinger. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Bill. I appreciate it, Patrick. Thanks for having me. And I think we have a lot in common. Just like you, I never played at the highest level, but I stood really close to a bunch of guys that did. So
that's true. So let's get right into the questions, and I'll start off. You played, as I stated at the outset, you played for the Wisconsin Badgers. You played football, and you were a quarterback. You won a Rose Bowl against Stanford in your time there. Want to talk a little bit about who recruited you, and for a lot of our audience, they're going to ask the question, why didn't you go to the University of Minnesota?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, but I grew up, my dad was the offensive coordinator at the University of North Dakota, and that was my world. Those were my heroes, and not just the players, but the staff, and I was very fortunate I got to be around them every day, and I grew up thinking that's where I'd go play, and there wasn't really a question. And then as we got closer, I actually went to camp at the University of Minnesota when Coach Wacker was here after my sophomore year. I won MVP for the quarterbacks. Mike Tommerdahl was there. Jim Zorn was the quarterback coach. That was pretty exciting. And at that time I thought, oh, maybe there's a chance to go play for the Gophers. And I like to give Coach Mason a hard time because then Mace came in and they already had Asad Abdul-Khalik, I think, committed and was a great quarterback. And then plans shifted. So I talked to Iowa. Brett Bielema recruited me at Iowa, and Wisconsin kind of came in late. And wasn't like it is today. I didn't do the same kind of due diligence and research and trips. I went down there for camp, and Coach Alvarez put his arm around me and offered me a scholarship, and I said yes.
Walk us through a little bit your journey as a kid growing up in North Dakota, and then on to the University of Wisconsin, and then on to the NFL.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate to play or grow up in a place like Grand Forks. It was just an awesome town, a college town. High school sports were important, and I took advantage. Like I said, I got to grow up going to practice every day with the college, and then played 4 sports in high school. I played football and basketball, Legion baseball, and then ran track as well for most of my career. So it was in that era where, you know, the seasons changed and you just put on a different uniform and had a great group of friends, and just so thankful to grow up in that environment and have such amazing teachers and coaches and people that were supporting me. And those are some of the best memories I have of sports, as many of us do. And then, like I kind of said, it just worked out that I got a scholarship to go to Wisconsin, and had no idea if I had the ability to play at that level. And luckily, being a coach's kid, I was fine with redshirting, which many kids have a problem with sitting out, but I kind of understood that process of working hard and developing and kind of closing that gap. Because people ask me all the time, you know, is it a bigger jump from college to the NFL or from high school to college? And for me, it was way bigger from high school to college. just because the speed of the game, the size of the players, all that kind of stuff. So that year was great for me. Kind of ended up meeting my wife at the back end of that year. She played soccer at Wisconsin, and just, enjoyed all the academics and social life and athletics that go along in Madison. And, from there, I think I won my first 14 games as a starter, right? And my first start was at Ohio State my freshman year. I still wasn't sure I could play at that level. I came in the second half of a Michigan game and did okay, and went to the Horseshoe to get my first start. And we were down 17-0 with a minute and a half left in the half, and we drove down the field and kicked a field goal to make it 17-3 going into the locker room, and came out in the second half and scored 39 unanswered points. Beat them 42-17, and pretty soon I'm getting interviewed by Lynn Swan, standing on the field at the Horseshoe going, oh my gosh, what's going on? And from there it was like a whirlwind, those next, through the Rose Bowl and that, and it's the rest is history, as they say.
Did you ever feel, we talked a little bit this off camera, did you think you could play another sport at Wisconsin? Did you ever contemplate that? And just your opinion on today's society for athletics, where it's so one-dimensional, and just give us your thoughts on you played 4 sports, and others are doing that, have done that in the past, but it's changed a bit.
Yeah. Kind of going through this with my kids now. They're starting to get to that age, and I think the thing when I was growing up, I didn't spend a ton of time thinking about where I was going next. I was more worried about being a leader and winning football games or basketball games or baseball games for Grand Forks Central. And I think that's the biggest shift that's happened. I mean, I thought there was a time I thought maybe I could play college basketball at the D2 level or smaller, and I loved hoops. Baseball, Wisconsin didn't have a team, so I didn't have to make that choice at my time. But I think the biggest shift that's happened, and I see it as a parent, it gets very difficult to be able to make those decisions for your kids. Because the reality is, in this day and age, the machine is built to get those kids captured all year long, right? And all these sports are kind of grabbing at their time, and it gets really difficult, and I think causes a lot of anxiety in parents as to, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the wrong thing? Are we giving him or her the best chance to be successful down the line? And what I always tell people, and what we try to do as a family, and it's not always easy, is how do we make a decision that's best for our son or daughter today, and in the hopes of whatever that outcome makes them a better human in the long run. How is this experience benefiting their development as a person? Not just, are we doing this to make sure they make the next team to get a scholarship? And it's really hard when there's these pressures, and now you have social media and kids getting recruited. I'll never forget, I was at Pitt, and I was coaching, and we had signed a player, and he comes in, he kind of kicks his feet up on the desk, and he's like, I made it. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, my whole life, this was the goal. This was the end game, to get a college scholarship and go play college football. And I'm like, dude, you just got here. Like, this is just starting. And that's just this chapter. And then you got a whole another 10 chapters to write in your life. So I think what's happened to us a little bit is the messaging's gotten wrong, right? And everybody's in so much of a hurry to get somewhere. And then, unfortunately, they get there and they realize this isn't the end.
Brooks, if you watch an NFL game, it's not unusual to see a quarterback chewing out the offensive lineman, maybe wide receiver, somebody, right? You've always impressed me as a pretty laid-back, humble guy. Did that serve you well in the huddle? And when need be, could you get a little feisty and get in somebody's face?
Yeah. I'm a competitive person, and I think that's important to play that position. And I think it's also important to be level-headed. But as much as anything, I think for any leadership position, you got to be who you are, right? You got to be authentic to who you are. And some guys are a little more. I think about Rich Gannon, some of those highlights, right? He held those guys to a high standard, and he wasn't afraid to get after them. Other guys do it with a little bit more love and a pat on the back. And I think it's just really important that where you see guys really fall down is when they're trying to be somebody they're not, right? And put on a little bit of a show, and I think that's when it catches up with them. So I had my moments and my times. They were few and far between, and generally like to inspire with the unifying and the positive approach.
Did coach ever come to you and say, hey, Brooks, we need you to be a little more vocal, or we need you to get on these guys? Or maybe it was the opposite, say, back off a little bit.
Yeah, I think with, one of the benefits of growing up being a coach's kid, and I probably knew sometimes it probably hurt me a little bit because I knew what was going on in those coaches' meetings, maybe a little bit more than I should. And but I think I always had a pretty good sense and a pretty good ability to communicate with the coaches because of my background. So yeah, there was times that Coach Alvarez and I would talk, and he tells the story now and kind of laughing at how those weren't one-sided conversations. I certainly wasn't afraid to provide him feedback as well. But it was a good relationship, and I was thankful to have the background that I did to handle those.
You played with 4 NFL clubs, all different in nature. When you look back and reflect on those times, what did you get out of that, and what would you say if there was something you would have done differently in the NFL, or things differently? Is there anything you would tell a young person who wanted to be an NFL quarterback? And there's lots that do.
Yeah.
Very few make it, as you know. What would you tell them?
The first thing, I think looking at my career, the first thing that you get is this unbelievable relationships. And I think that's true of sports at every level. But the cool thing about the NFL is once you're in that fraternity, you kind of start to develop, and because it's so transitional for people moving around, you kind of develop these relationships across 32 clubs, right? This whole ecosystem becomes a part of your network, and you just develop these unbelievable relationships. And to a certain extent, especially us guys that were on the bottom that got shuffled around a little bit more than others, you cross paths a lot of different times, and you have an empathy and an understanding of the situation that they're in that can sometimes be difficult. I think the hard thing for me was I grew up in a very, I call it the Grantland Rice view of college football, right? Kind of the Norman Rockwell ideological view of what football meant to the team, the community, the institution. And I always played for the W on the side of my helmet, right? Or the Grand Forks Central logo. And that was so important to me to be connected to that and believe to my core that we have a unified vision. Now you go to the NFL, it's a little bit different, right? You have a job to do. You have a responsibility team to do your job. And if you don't, we'll find somebody else that will. And I think that was hard for me to really play with the same level of fire and confidence that I would normally gather through kind of the cohesiveness of the team. So I think for me, going back, having more confidence in my ability to shift that focus and be able to compete at that level, I would have directed that a little bit different. But what I tell people all the time, I mean, go back to my original point of, you have an opportunity to have these experiences at every level of sports. And some of my greatest memories, and it wasn't no more or less important to me when we won the Rose Bowl compared to when, we beat West Fargo on homecoming my junior year of high school, or we got to win in the semifinals to go to the state championship, or the Legion baseball tournament. Like, those experiences are right there in front of you. You just got to find where they are. And certainly it's great to aspire to do them on a stage as big as the NFL, and it's certainly nice to get paid to do it. But I think that oftentimes where I struggle for people that are looking past where they are today, and they're missing so many great experiences right in front of them.
A couple of moments ago, you mentioned the prominence of social media. When you played, it wasn't quite as prevalent as it is today, which is, of course, everywhere.
Yeah.
How do you think social media is impacting athletes? Because they're getting feedback instantly.
Yeah.
And some of it is good, much of it isn't.
It's a complex topic that we could probably spend a couple hours talking about. I see it from a few different lenses. Number one, I'm glad I didn't have it because it probably would have got me in a little bit of trouble on a couple Saturday nights at the KK in Madison. So on that sense, it's a little bit of a positive, but it is real, right? These guys have to. It's kind of forced them to live a more sheltered experience in college because of what is possible to be put out there. And we can say, hey, you should never make a mistake. But they are 18, 19, 20-year-old kids without a frontal lobe that's fully developed. So it is tough on that sense. I think the other side that's interesting is it's shifted the platform that these athletes have. And I think originally I thought about that through, the Graham Mertz and the Braylon Allen and the higher end players at the college football or basketball level. But I think what's also cool about it is you look at the women's soccer player or a women's hockey player or whatever that aren't maybe having the same level of exposure to the national media or games on TV. It's also given those people a platform to tell their story and give access to young girls and maybe non-revenue sports in a different way. And I think that's what's neat, right? If I'm a soccer player and my dream is to play at Wisconsin or Minnesota. A long time ago, it was hard to find access to those teams or figure things out. Well, now not only can I have access and find the teams, I can also find those individual players. And so I think it's leveled the playing field in a lot of ways, and it's the Wild West, and it's moving fast. So it's going to evolve, but it's going to be a fun movie to watch.
After you hung up your pads and your helmet, you coached at both the collegiate level at University of Pittsburgh. You coached at the high school level as well, very successfully. What do you think is more challenging, dealing with what we call the helicopter-type parents or recruiting athletes to come to a major university?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I'm no longer coaching in college is because of the demand of recruiting. That is a very demanding part of that job. And with the introduction of social media and the expectations, it just continues to get more and more difficult. And what's hard about that one is that I struggled with is you can't really understand and connect with the player or the family in a way that you understand what's important to them and why they're making their decision. It feels like there's so many things pulling at them that you're checking all these boxes and trying to get at them and introduce to them and around them and get their attention, but you don't really have a foundation as to how and what's impactful. And it feels like by the time you do, they've made a decision and life goes on. The high school side, I love that challenge of dealing with the families and the kids, and I stole this, so I'm not going to take credit. But what I would do is in the team meeting at the beginning of the season, I would say, my purpose is to use this game as a vehicle to make your son a better man, right? My goal is to win a bunch of football games and make him a really good player. Anything about the goal, I'll talk to your son about. Anything about the purpose, here's my cell phone number, I'll talk to you for as many hours as you want, right? If you want to talk about how I can help make your son a better person, let's talk. If you want to talk about playing time or the call I made or anything like that, you can pound sand. I'll talk to your son and treat him like a man. So football is a little different. Now, if I was a hockey coach or a basketball coach and I had to cut kids in the playing time, it might be a little different, but I love that challenge in football because it's why I did the job.
Brooks, playing quarterback means not only having a great arm, but it means you have to be a leader too. Did that part of the role come easily to you, or was that something that you had to work on?
Well, I think I'm still working on it. That's and a great arm is, that's why I went to Wisconsin so I could hand it off a bunch. I loved all facets of it. I mean, I got a picture right after I was born. My dad, setting me on my mom and putting a football in my arm and taking the picture, right? So that stuff I lived and breathed. And I think where I was a good leader is that I had the ability, as Coach Chris would tell me, I had the ability to sit at every table in the cafeteria, right, or the meal room, right? I could sit down with the guys from the inner city of Detroit, and I could sit down with the guys from northern Wisconsin. I think that trust and that ability to build the relationships allowed me to lead in a different way. Now, one of the things that took me a long time to figure out is I had success early, right? And I think because of that, I didn't fully understand the whole dynamics of what was going on around me, right? And I think oftentimes when that happens to us in any line of work or sport, you know, the success comes first and we're not fully connected to what was impactful and as intentional about our steps going forward. So if I could go back and do it again, there's some things that I would do different and I would probably be a little more mature about. But I think all in all, I had the ability to be a 2-time captain there and do some of that stuff. So I think I was okay.
Tell us a little bit about, you know, you've talked about successes, and as a coach and your father, who was a very good coach as well and a leader, would understand this, that sometimes you learn from failures. Is there a time in your life where you had a failure that it really helped propel you to be a better, not only man, but a better coach or a better athlete?
Yeah, and I'm gonna jump back on something you said, just tie back to something we were talking about earlier. Is I think one of the things that's lost, especially in the quarterback position, is the leadership and the competitive greatness, because kids aren't playing 3 or 4 sports, right? That's where you get all that stuff from, right? A lot of these kids they're trying to manufacture a quarterback that can throw it into a net and be accurate and do all these things for the Nike elite camp or whatever, so he can get recruited and get to the next level. But what's missing is, you know, that what you learn playing shortstop and what you learn being a point guard and you know, changing your throwing angle and just making a play, and how to handle that situation when, you know, the team's down or the team's up. So just tying that back, I think that's the other place I got that from, and that's one of the things I see it in quarterbacks nowadays. A lot of these kids are stiff, manufactured players that don't really appreciate the nuances of the position. We do not have enough time today to talk about my failures and what I learned from them, because there is too many to count. And I think one of the things that it took me a long time. I think the biggest thing, to answer the question broadly, is I was a firstborn, right, of 4 kids, and now I see that in my oldest. But you know, I had that mentality of wanting to win, wanting to please, wanting to do the right thing because the coach told me to do it. And because of that, I think I hid from failure a lot, right? I think that I tried to deflect, and not that I wouldn't take accountability or responsibility for it. I'd say the words, right, my fault, and I know what you're supposed to do as a leader, but I think deep down, I didn't know how to face those failures and really learn from them, take everything I can, and then set them aside, right? And when you get thrown into that and have to fail so publicly at a young age, it's a really difficult thing. You know, I think from the outside looking in, we think of these people as, you know, they should be wired different because they're playing quarterback at Wisconsin or wherever else. But at the end of the day, they're 19, 20, 21-year-old kids, right? And you can't really prepare anybody for that. I'll never forget, like I said, we ran the table, won a Rose Bowl, won my 14 or 15 first starts. It's like, I'm different, right? Like, and then pretty soon, you know, 8, 10 weeks later, they're chanting "Soar G," you know, to put the backup in the game and get my butt off the field. And you learn pretty quickly that it's a reality for all of us. As a matter of fact, I think there's a guy in Tampa Bay that's having to learn that again. And it is the hardest thing and the best thing about playing quarterback is you're forced to deal with those lessons.
Yeah. Along those lines, Brooks, a recent study showed that current and retired athletes are more predisposed to having sleep disorders and mental disorders. Do you think that we're paying enough attention to the mental health of athletes?
I think we're getting better as a society across the board. I think probably my answer. I think we're on the front end of figuring out even how to approach that topic. You know, it's I got a call from a kid yesterday that had caddied for me, and he's trying to make it on the tour for a little bit, and now he's in the working world. And because of a conversation we had, he called me up because he's like, I'm working a job I hate. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm upside down. We had some good conversations. Can you help me out? And I think if I talk specifically about athletes, the thing that I know is hard for me, and as so many guys I played with, you know, when the guy retires from 3M after a 40-year career and he's a little lost figuring out what's next, we kind of go, okay, well, what do you expect? That was his whole profession, and he needs some time. When an athlete retires at 35 and he's a little lost and whatever, we tell him, hey, why don't you go cry to the bank? What's your problem? I mean, you got every advantage in the world. You got all kinds of money. You've done great. When in reality, he's done this every day since he was 7 years old, right? And what happens in that, beyond the paychecks going away and the whole world looking at you different, is you realize that, man, along the way, I didn't really mean to, but my identity was pretty wrapped up in what I did. And all of a sudden you pull away that athlete tag and it's not there. That's really the first time that those guys have looked at it and said, who am I without this sport? And so I think there's a lot of things that go into the things you mentioned, because now there's the physical side and substance abuse side, and there's all these variables that play into ultimately the long-term health of these players. But I think if we could do a better job on the front end of starting to establish that kind of mindset in our players, they'd be better off through the transition out. And that's not just NFL. That's somebody who was the best club soccer player in Minnesota and went and had a college scholarship, and now it's gone.
We're down to about a minute and a half here. This has been a fascinating conversation. You're very well spoken, Brooks. I wanted to ask you a little bit, this is just more personal. So you transitioned, as you talked about, like a lot of athletes at 35 or younger have to transition into the real world, the working world, the sport coat and tie world, or dresses. For you, you've become very successful as a senior vice president at Bell Bank, and congratulations on all your success. I know, knowing you for a long time, I know you've worked really hard. Just tell us a little bit, we only have less than a minute, about that job.
Yeah, it's great, and it wasn't, I left coaching with really no backup plan, and number 4 on the way, right? So it was real, and it's humbling. Right. I mean, I started off, and you go back to taking every breakfast meeting you can get and having coffee and meeting with everybody you can. And I think the thing where I was so fortunate to find Bell Bank specifically is that as I started to understand the industry and where I think I could provide value, I aligned myself with an organization that reflects those values. And that's the thing that I thought I had kind of lost after being in sports, is that idea of being a part of something bigger than yourself, right, and contributing to that. So I'm really thankful to have found a spot that I can do that and try and do some good in the community.
Awesome. And you're doing good
Thank
in the
you.
community. Brooks Bollinger, thanks for being on Behind the Game. I really appreciate it. I know Bill does as well. Great conversation. Thank you to Lexus of Wayzata, Lexus of Maplewood, Charlie Swanson, and the good people out there. And thank all of you for watching Behind the Game. We'll see you again next month.